So thank you for having me here today, and thank you James Cook University, because yes, we do have a long history together, because the fact that with James Cook University, my dad was a gardener there, and through being a gardener, he actually went to a lecture that led him on to fight for his land. Now when he was at that lecture, you know, a couple of the professors, they said that the land didn't belong to him. And he says, yes it does. It's my inherited land. Because before him, you know, his ancestral people were always carers of that land. But they said no when Lieutenant James Cook came to Australia, it was taken away from us. So he said, well, I'm going to prove them wrong. And I'm going to show them that, yes, I do own this land. That led him into a legal battle. Now this legal battle had 5 years beforehand, because I was actually in grade 9. My dad went off the Torres Straits. Didn't really see him for a period of 5 years because he had to accumulate all his information. And then after that, 10-year long battle. By this time, I'd moved away from home, started having my own family. And I'd always see him as he was travelling from Townsville to Canberra. They always caught the bus, because it was a thing of like, we just got to get there. So they'd catch the bus, him and Mum, and they'd always stop in at my house. Stop in, check on me to make sure I'm okay, and, you know, and catch up with the grandchildren. Because at this stage I had 2 boys. And during this time of him fighting, every time he came back from Canberra, we'd always be sitting on the back step. It was really hard because I'm sitting there, my 2 sons, and my father's sitting there, and it's that thing, he starts to cry. How do you console your father when he's crying? Do you give him a big hug? Do you just sort of sit in the space until he's ready to talk to you? But it was one of those things that through the whole court case, they started doing things to chip away at who he was as a person. And you know, if you do that for 10 years, it's going to take a toll. You know, it started wearing him down. But you know, he was a very strong man, but yes, it does take toll. And then in the end, he got very sick. I remember ringing up, I was pregnant with my 3rd son, and ringing up just to wish everyone, you know, because it was getting towards the festive season, and just to make sure everyone was okay. And I remember he picked up the phone and he goes, hello? No. And I did the same thing back, hello? I said, yes, who's this? And I said, Gail. And he reckon, stop making fun. And I said, but you sound funny. And he goes, all right, I love you, your mother. So pass him over to Mum. So I was talking to Mum and I said, what's wrong with Dad's voice? And she said, oh, he's got laryngitis. Wasn't to be. Yeah, she had cancer of the throat. Which started, he started talking in whispers. And with that, you know, then from his throat, they realised he had it in his hips, cancer in his hips, because he kept walking around the yard punching his hips, and we were wondering, what are you doing, beating yourself up? No, my hips are sore. This helps it. And I'm going, how is hitting it helping? But that's what he thought. And so must have been about a month later, he decided to go to another doctor. He didn't like what the doctor was saying, because the doctor kept saying, you have arthritis, go home, take a Panadol, it'll be all fine. He went to another doctor, and they said, no, we're going to do some x-rays on you. When they did the x-rays, they found out he was riddled in his hips with cancer. So they put him into hospitals to start radiation treatment. And during this time, his mind was still thinking about that case, because it was meant that, you know, if it didn't go through, that means we didn't have our right entitlement to that land, and he couldn't pass it on to his children. as we couldn't pass it on to ours. But with what had happened, when he went to hospital, he started his radiation treatment, but then they said, this one isn't strong enough, we have to send you to Brisbane. And I thought, oh, well, he's coming to Brisbane, he's closer to me, because I'm only in New South Wales, I can come up to the border. But they said to me, no, you can't, your father's radioactive, you can't come near him. And I went, what? You're heavily pregnant, you've only got a month to go, you can't go near your dad, because it'll affect your unborn child. And so that really ripped at me, and I thought, no, I want to see my dad. The next phone call I get is to tell me he's passed away. And all I remember was sitting there and just chucking that phone. Because my sister kept saying, sit down, I want to talk to you. And I'm going, I'm pregnant, I'm not crippled, what's the matter? She's going, no, sit down. So I sat down and she told me, she said, just letting you know, we lost Dad. And I was in disbelief. I thought, my dad's, you're too strong, you can't, he's not dead, you're lying. And I walked away, and then my mother-in-law at the time came and told me again and filled in a bit more of the gaps. And then the next day I made my way to Townsville. The doctor sent me with lots of drugs because the baby just happened to be sitting on a sciatica, so I needed lots of tablets to help alleviate that pain. But I travelled all the way to Townsville, and then I had my son the day before I buried my dad. "22 years ago." And it's that thing of, you know, he will always be my reminder of how long I've lost my dad, but he also bears my father's traditional name, Koiki. Now, Koiki means leader. And so he was a leader. And when he was buried on Murray Island, he was buried as a king. And now, the Torres Strait Islanders actually celebrate who he is. Because on June the 3rd, that was when the verdict came down in honour of my dad. 6 months after he'd passed away. But on his deathbed, he actually knew he was going to win. Dad had some really out there things to say to us when we were growing up. Because one of the things was, when I was 15, I was watching him drawing himself, and then he was doing a teacher training course. Because he said, I'm going to be a teacher, and I'm going to run a school, and I'm going to do this. And I went, yeah, that's all good. So, 15, he's drawing himself in the mirror. He's put this red thing across his head. And I said, Dad, that's very radical. Because that's a real land rights statement. He goes, well, my girl, one day all of Australia will know my name. And I went, really? How? He goes, no, you watch, they're going to know. Well, everybody's going to know my name. I went, okay. And then I walked away, because I thought, well, this is too big for me to fathom. I'm only 15. But yes, when I turned 23, I went, yeah, they do. And with that, it was that thing of I remember the day when that on the radio came to say that he'd won. I was sitting there crying. I was holding my son and I was just crying. And people walking past in the car and looking at me. I'm going, don't look at me, ask a question. Don't ask me, why am I crying? I'll tell you, it's happy tears. And the clouds were rolling in, and I said to myself, look, my dad is now dancing because he's won. Because that's where, whenever we see rolling clouds, that's where we say our forefathers are celebrating something. We don't say that's rain coming, because it's a celebration. It's a celebration of something. And that's what it was. My father was celebrating. And when as I went on, after the funeral and everything had stopped, and then everything sort of started to sink in, it was really weird going into offices where you had to sign your name. Because a lot of people behind the counters, you sign your name, they look at you, they walk away with that paper, they have a little chat to somebody over here, come back, and then they deal with you. And then I sort of stand there going, oh, Unks, I'll tell you. Because that name was prolific through the newspapers. It was just, we were just out there, Mabo, Mabo, Mabo. And I thought, you all don't understand who Mabo is and why he was doing it. He was just a little man who only went to grade 3. Then he had to leave school because he had to go and work to support his family. When he left school, he actually started working on pearling lager. Now that's a big job because when you dive down, you've only got that helmet on. And you'd have to drop into the water, then walk with those big heavy boots to collect all the pearl shells. And while he was doing that, he picked up a dictionary and learnt every word in that dictionary. And one of the things was, when he was doing that, he thought if he learns all the words, he'd be able to speak to white fellas. Because, being an Indigenous man, we either speak Creole, which is broken English, or the language of our people, which is Meriamir. And if you're not fluent in that outside of your island, people look at you like you got 2 heads. So Dad decided, okay, I'm going to learn this and I'm going to master this other language because it wasn't his first language. And so in the end, Dad knew 4 languages because he had to know the dialects of the Torres Strait to actually communicate with all peoples in the east. We are from the east. You have islands in the west and the north and to the south. And so those whole dialects are all completely different. And so you had to master all those dialects, and that's what he did. Because when he came off the pearling boats, he actually then came to the mainland to work on the sugarcane fields. He did that for a little while, and then he went to work on the railway. When he worked on the railway, that's when he met my mother. We always joked with him in the kitchen going, yeah, when you two met, it was love. And they said, but they used to sit there and giggle like little kids. Yeah, it was. It was really cute. But it was one of those things that it was true, because when Dad first saw my mother, that was it. He knew that's who he wanted to marry. And then they went on to have 7 of us. Then traditionally, Dad was given 2 more children by his father on Murray Island, because by the time Dad was 19, had no kids, so therefore his father thought, oh, okay, might be something wrong, so we better get him some piknini. So to instill that the name still goes on. So we had an older brother and older sister given to us before we were even born. Then when we came along, then they came into our life. And it was good because coming from Indigenous families, we just used to have a lot of people around. And at the end of the day, we're all family. And you just get on. And one of the things that I found with having a big family was that you could always go and chat to somebody. There was always someone that you can go and have a chat to. But in my immediate family, so with the 7 of us, I have a brother and 2 sisters older, and I have a brother and 2 sisters younger. So I'm the one in the middle. Which for me was a bit of a nuisance because the older ones didn't want me hanging around. And the younger ones said I was too old to hang around, so what do? Well, you go next door and you become mates with the guy next door, who's a little bit younger than you, but he doesn't care, because, he's also a middle child. So up the mango tree we go, we build cubby houses. So that was our pastime. And there's that thing of like, I became one of the boys. To me, that was fine, because I didn't want to do the girly thing, the girly older girl thing, and the little kid thing. So being a tomboy was fine. But it also grounded me in the fact that I could do my own thing. I could be myself. I could speak my own mind. But in the whole sense of the family, your older siblings did a lot of the talking. Your younger siblings did a lot of the fighting. So I just sat still in the middle and just watched. My younger sister used to say, "You were really scary when you were young," and I went, "Why?" They said, "You didn't talk." And I said, "Why? You guys did it all for me. I didn't have to." I said, "I watched, I listened, and I learned." I said, "That's why now I remember all the things that we did with our father, and I remember all the things and the people who came to our house to actually seek counsel with my father." It was very interesting. Our veranda became the meeting place for many people, different people. It wasn't just family, because my job was, if the car turned up, I'd have to go and come outside to the window, open the louver and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, count how many people are coming to get all the tea ready. So then I'd go into the kitchen and get all the cups, lay them all out, and then put the urn on and then start making things and getting things ready for them so they could have that cup of tea when they came to our house. Because that's just, traditionally that's what we do. When I went looking for my sisters, they'd be climbing out the window, going, hey, where are you going? No, we're not going, we're going. Too many people coming. And then I go downstairs and say, my younger sisters, can you come upstairs and help me make the tea? And they said, we're too young, we can't help. And I went, how? Thinking, okay, fine, I'll do it. So I'd go out with my little pen and paper and ask people what they wanted and come back in, make it and take it back out to them. And then if they stayed longer than a couple of hours, then I'd have to make them, if they were there for lunch, I'd have to make them lunch, which to me didn't worry me because that's what a daughter does for a father. And traditionally that was my role because I didn't step away from it. I didn't do what my big sisters did and jump out the window and take off because it was too hard. I thought, no, this is what my father wants me to do. This is what I have to do. And lucky because then now I watched, I learnt, and I was always in awe of my father just because when people came, just the way he would initiate the conversation and hold them, they were all putty in his hand, you just watch him and they'd all just be just like blue tack stuck to him, just listening to every word. But it was that thing of like, he could speak to them about everything they needed to know. There were uni lecturers coming out asking him to talk to him about his land and cultural essences of the Torres Straits, in particular, things that they didn't understand in the mainstream but worked well in our culture, and they just needed to fill in those gaps. And so with that, he actually gave them an audience. Whoever wanted his time, he gave time. And that's where I learnt a lot. And with all that I've learnt, I think something's rubbed off that has given me the gift of the gab now, that I can actually get up and talk. Because when I was 15 and he said to me, you have to get into public speaking, I thought he was crazy. Because 15 is like, no way, that's shame. That's shame. We're going to get up there in front. But, I do it. Because the subject matter to me is my dad. And I don't need notes on my father. It comes from the heart. And one of the things that my father instilled in me is to actually be proud about what you do and how you carry yourself, which is what I do. And what I've also done is, with that, I've carried it on to everything I do. So with my art, I bring in the stories about my relationship with my father. This picture on this side, this is clam dreaming. Clam dreaming was a picture I did because for the first time when I was 9, we went back to Murray Island for a school trip because Dad started his own school. It was called the Black Community School. It was a school where, based on the fact that to ensure that Indigenous children were strong people before they went into mainstream high school. Because one of the things was, he found that a lot of kids, they weren't strong in themselves to be strong people to move forward. So what happened was, he said, okay, I'm going to start a school. I'm going to base it on the fact that I'm going to teach culture. Culture is the main essence. Learning cultural dance, language, and arts and craft. And then everything else can come after. So our English and maths and everything else came. That was the second part of our education. But with the first one, he decided, well, all these kids have grown up in Townsville, we need to take them back and show them their birth island, where they can, where as they get older, they can always go back to. So the first time I ever went in a dinghy, we rowed out. We're heroes. I'm all of 9, my sister's 10, and the other sister's 12. We decided to get in the boat and row it out to where the drop-off is. because you got this nice coral reef, then all of a sudden it drops to a blue-black nothing. And well, in there's big sharks, everything else, and we pushed the boat out, chuck that fishing line down, pulling his fishing, but we're only pulling up heads because the sharks are coming along and eating them really fast. So it's like, okay, we got to outdo these sharks. But then all of a sudden these great big sharks are coming underneath us anyway. So we're sitting really still. And then one of the other things was that when the shark did come, would be as wide as a stage actually. And because the boat was just a little bit either side of it, we thought, oh no, its fin's going to just topple us over and we're going to be dead. And then we all started crying. And then my brother was standing on the reef and he had the rope in his hand and he was sort of just waiting because he thought he can either pull us in now or just make us suffer a little bit more. He made us suffer, as big brothers do. So, because he thought it was quite funny just watching our reaction to the shark. So, all right, he pulls us in now and then he just starts laughing. He walks off and keeps looking for clamshells because that was our job. Dad said, go and find all the clamshells, we'll put them into the lagoon to instill that the clams get bigger. And so this picture here was when, after we'd found the clams, we'd put them into the water and I'd pull the dinghy in and I sat on the dinghy and the water was calm at the moment, but then my little sister came and started splashing and doing things, and so I started sort of getting a little bit seasick. But I looked in the water at the clams and it started to distort the shapes. And so hence, that's why those clams that have that shape, is because that's my memory of my first time on Murray Island. And this other one over here that has the big circle in it, that's clam dreaming. Now clam dreaming was done because when Dad was the gardener, my job with him was to go out and help him. So after I'd finished school, I'd go out to James Cook because he had that job because the school at the time was running on a very, very, very tight budget. The teachers were doing a lot of work free of charge. So Dad had to get a second job to actually pay them. So he'd pay them and then he'd try and help and then try and pay our mortgage on our house so we didn't, so we had a house. But the yams were grown in the creek. The creek is now called Wadamuli Creek. So the traditional owners gave the creek a name. And in the creek bed itself, we used to walk along and he would dig and we would replant the seeds all the way along because there was always water in the creek. At different times it would run off the hill and constantly flow. Then he would say, okay, it's time to go and dig them up now, it's been long enough. So we'd dig them up and some would be as big as, see this box here? They would be that big. So you'd have to dig around it and then lift it out. We'd lift it out, put it in the back of our car. We usually found about 4 of them. And then we'd put it in the back of the car and we'd cut it up. And the next thing he wanted to do was drive all around Townsville to share it with Torres Strait Island families because it was too much for us to eat. And that was wrong to take too much where you can't share it. So we would share. And one of the things is, that's my memory, that is my memory in that picture of my time with my father. And that's where both of these pictures are outside now on your wall. And they look fantastic. It came down to a conversation between Professor Stanley Nangala, who is now the professor at the David Nupayan in South Australia, the university there. And we were talking about it, he goes, you should have, we should do something with James Cook in Singapore. And he goes, my good friend is there. And I thought, oh, okay. I thought, well, I'll leave that to you. I know nothing. So I kept, because at the time I was an artist in residence. So they gave me a room where I could go in and produce work. And one of the things was he'd come in and he'd bring people in and we'd talk while I was painting. And then he'd left and I thought, oh well, nothing of it. And then I mentioned it to Vicky that, we were talking about this whole process. And then Vicky from Umbrella Studios then followed through. And as a result, that's brought me here today. But one of the things is that the connection between the university and myself is my dad. You know, and I'm very, very proud to be his daughter. And I'm very humbled whenever I go anywhere to talk to people. And it's that thing of like people, because it's putting the human factor on what he did. Because he did such a big, if you want to know about the case, you know, you can actually Google his case about what and how he fought for what he did. Because it's a big read, so if you're up to it. But what I'm doing is just giving you the fact on who he was as a man. Because culturally, he wasn't very tall. He was just a little bit taller than me, but he was big in voice. And he was always a man who was passionate about people. And passionate to make sure that everyone was dealt with correctly and no one was done bad by it. Because when he was working on the pearling boats, they were the lowest paid people on the boat. The next highest ones were the Japanese divers. Then above them were the white Australian divers. So he thought that was unfair, because the people of the browner skin were getting paid the lower wage, and still they were the best divers. So he wanted to implement change, and that's what he did. And one of the other things that that I've done is I've worked with Vicky, and we've actually formed a group called Murray's and Ink. Now Murray's and Ink is a group that we all come together to do art. And it's that thing of like, yeah. Vicky's going to show you some slides to go with this bit of a chat. See up here, I have an exhibition that we opened last night at the Australian Consulate. It's called Mabo Kara Art, which means Mabo, which is me, Kara, which is mine, and art, which is what I do. And you know, because everyone's style is completely different. Now, with Murray's and Ink, we actually do a whole series of things. We get master printers in to work with us. We also are people who you know, the main common thing that pull us all together is just the love of art. We all have our own style. We've all come in as established artists, but what it is that we come together and we do art together. Yep. So, Ron McBurney is a fantastic printmaker in Townsville. He was the one who actually did the Slender piece. Myself, Susan Peters, and Shirley Collins, we did a triptych, but this is the middle piece of two others. But Ron McBurney, he's based in Townsville, and he is he's a master of the craft, and he's worked a lot with all the artists in the group. And this is that wild jam dreaming. So what we'll do is we'll leave these information too, so the university has them. So if people want to keep reading about what it is that I've done for those pictures. And clam dreaming, same. So here we did a workshop through James Cook University when they used to have the hands-on process of doing the lithographs, but now they've taken that away and everything's all digital. So, but now all the lithograph stones and the machines are all at Umbrella Studios, so we can still do that process. And through this process, we were Anne Lord. She was one of the professors out at the university, who is a very talented printmaker herself, and she was the one who actually talked us through when we were doing our lithographs. And it's a very interesting process. You have to have a lot of muscles because you've got to grind that stone. It's a wax on, wax off process, but it's really good. The end products are really, really nice. And this one here. This is a picture I did with Ron McBurney, and it was one of the ones that it comes out of lithograph, but it's actually a monoprint. This one here is because Ron does a different process to Theo Tremblay. Theo Tremblay is another master printer we work with, and And Ron has shown me this technique, and I really like this technique because I can get everything that I do in my work on this style. And each year at the Cairns, we do it's called CIAF, so Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. And this year it's in July, but every other year it was always in August. But and it'll be every second year. And what it does, it showcases Indigenous artists in the North Queensland area. So we, as artists from Townsville, we go up and we showcase the best of Townsville. And then the rest of the artists from Torres Straits and the Cape York area, so all the Aboriginal communities and everything, we all come together to make art. And that is if you ever get to Cairns at that time of the year, that's really good to go and have a look at the diversity of art and the diversity of the region. So this lad here, this is Icy Day. Icy Day is actually my cousin on both sides, on my mum and my dad's side. And this is one of the exhibitions that we had in Cairns. As you can see on the wall, we have a whole lot of monoprints. Monoprints means it's a one-off print, so the vibrant colour, we put things on top to give it a really good picture. And then we started doing ceramics with some ladies in Townsville, and just trying different things, because the only way we can make ourselves better artists is to push ourselves into a different realm, not just sit comfortable in one. And so these are some of the works that I have at the High Commission at the moment. So this was taken for our local paper. But yeah, there's some of the works. And then with a lot of Indigenous art, you know how they talk about the dots? With me, whenever I do dots, I do it in a contemporary form, because it's a thing of, for me, if I fly over the ocean and a wave breaks, it looks like it's just someone's just thrown pixie dust, and it looks like a whole lot of dots. And so that's where I do it in contemporary form, because it's what I see. A lot of people in Central Desert, they do it because it's country. It's their connection to country. When you look at Central Desert artists at their work, and you go on a plane, you fly across that country, it's like, man, how do they know the colouring of that land and how, specifically how things are? It's like, they must have flown over in an airplane, but nothing. You see some of them little old ladies sitting in country doing their work, but it's just the journey they always travel when they're gathering bush foods and everything else. And it's quite amazing to actually see those people sit there and do their work. I couldn't do it because I go a little bit crazy doing my own dots, and they do thousands. It's like, whoa, take my hat off to those people. Now, this one here. Now, the reason why I do carp is because I had a big old fish tank, and I had some inside the fish tank. And this day I thought, I've got to take them out to clean the tank. So I put them in a container at my feet and started scrubbing my container, and I'm looking going, whoa, they look really nice swimming around this bucket. I like the way they're moving. And so now I find when I do them, I finally remember my first fish I had, plus also too, for me, it's relaxing. It's one of those things that when I'm doing that line and doing those colours, it's very calming for me. And so I find that takes me to another space, and I enjoy painting that way. Now, this is a monoprint, but this is called a ghost. And what it is, it's a second print. This yellow and the blue would be more vibrant. The colour would be very, very strong. Whereas this one's a ghost print. So what happens is I take everything off and then I relay it back down. So I cut out like stencils and I put them back down to create my own works. Because everyone who does a monoprint is completely different. Now here are some more. These are my paintings this is my signature work. When everyone knows, when they see this, they know that's a Mabo. Because I say that I do landscapes, but I don't do landscapes here. I go, if you cut the surface, there's a whole lot of history in the land because of the sedimented layers that's formed over many, many years. It's not just something someone's done overnight. It is the history of the land. And so that's what I paint. I paint the history of the land. And on the history of the land, I acknowledge the spirits of country. Now, the spirits of country are people who have walked that country before us and people who have just joined them. Because I believe that when people go, they still walk the same space. And with that, I acknowledge those people. Because, you know, our forebears were those people. And, you know, and lots of my work, when I do it, is spiritually driven. When I was doing yam dreaming, the night I was doing that, I saw a reflection of myself in the glass where I was sitting, and I looked up and I could see like 12 people standing behind me. And I turned around and I thought, who's that? And I thought, I don't know. But I kept doing, and then I was going to give up, and then I thought, but I looked up and I saw all these people standing there supporting me, so I thought, that's it, I'm going to finish it. And then an hour later, I'd finished the work. Because otherwise I would have been if I would have done too much, I would have just thrown it away. But I walked away from it and went, it's finished now. But that's how most of my works are done, because it's something else that actually helps me develop my work. Yep. So with that, I once again say thank you. And to Mr. Anderson, thank you very much for having me. And if you have any questions, you know, I'll be hanging around if you want to actually have a chat. So thank you.
Are there any questions of Gail? First of all, does everybody know where the Torres Strait is? It's a wonderful place. The pointy bit of Queensland, up to Papua New Guinea, many, many islands. Mud islands, sand islands, and volcanic islands. And Murray Island, or Burr Island, is a volcanic island.
That's right.
I've been to nearly all of those islands. Yes, been to all of those islands. My last two jobs before I came here involved working in those parts of the world. A wonderful part of the world. I hope you'll get to go there. Any questions of Gail?
Gail, I just wanted to say, excuse me, that exhibition at the Australian High Commission is open through August, and it's free, and it's really beautiful, and I really want to encourage and invite everybody that has an opportunity to go by and see the work. It will really illuminate Australia, the countryside, and really more about Gail. So do take advantage if you can go.
I will consult with the chair of the social committee, and can you put a bus on for me?
I'm sure you can.
The chair of the social committee has made a decision.
I was just thinking that.
I have to tell you, one of the paintings is already sold because Robin bought it last night. I think it's the best one. Now, any questions?
I was just thinking that the themes you were talking about were very strong, strong spiritual themes. And you were also talking about there's a narrative of injustice there. And I just wondered whether you ever paint injustice. If you did, in what form do you paint it?
I think if I ever did anything along that line, I think I would do it in lino, because I could take it out in the lino. Because everything else, when I'm doing painting, I'd rather be in a calm state, whereas lino you can actually do the physical thing and really get into it. So depending on what the exhibition title would be, that I would put myself into that space. But sometimes it's that thing of like, when I paint and I put the colour, the background onto the canvas first, I usually leave them against my wall, and the painting dictates to me what needs to go on it. I don't force my hand to it, because I'd rather the painting show me what has to happen. That might sound a bit weird to people, but in my house, weird things happen, because I live in the house that my mum and dad owned, and they raised 7 of us in that house, and I now own that house, and I have 7 of my own. So mum and dad had 5 girls, 2 boys. I have 5 boys, 2 girls. And now I have 3 grandchildren. But that house is a house that is spiritually strong. People come to that house and they feel so calm. And then when I tell them, you know, usually it depends on where they're sitting, and I'll tell them the story of the house, they go, oh, I've got goosebumps. I go, but you've been here for a long time, why do you get goosebumps now? Yeah, but it's always good because like I said, if I was to do something like that, I would, I would try and,
Any other questions?
Your dad is a great man, right? So, what was the best advice that he gave you, and how does that advice actually affect your life?
The best advice my dad gave to me was to understand who I am and where I come from, and hold proud to myself, because he instilled in us a lot of his passions, and it's that thing of like we carry them and we do them in our own way. We're all, as you know, we can't be like our fathers, so we have to carry parts of our fathers, our mothers, and our family with us, and so that's what I do, and I do that proudly.
Any other?
Can you tell us some more about the school that your father started?
Well, in 1972, my father started the school because he came to my classroom. And at the time, my teacher was, who is now Senator Margaret Reynolds, who is an Australian senator in Australia, who is now resides in Tasmania. She's the Minister for Disabilities. I know that because of her, we always have chats, because she's like that other auntie. And when he came into the room, he was wondering, why do black kids always sit to the back of the room? And she goes, well, I try and encourage them to come to the front, but they just gravitate to the back. So he says, well, we have to change that. We might have to start our own school. And with that, if we start our own school, we'll have to instill that, you know, we do things that they want to do first and foremost. And one of the things too that happened was, she gave me a book to read. It was called Dick and Dora. Well, Dick and Dora were 2 little English children who played in snow. I live in Townsville where it's really hot. It's like here, same sort of, it's like, what's snow? You're telling a black girl that they talk about snow? What's that? Then time I see ice is when I go in my fridge. You know, you used to scrape it out and then you got ice, then you can throw snowballs. But otherwise, that was the only time. And so she decided that because each time we got the book, I pushed it aside. I didn't want to do it. Then she said, okay, I want you to do me something. So she stapled together like 12 pieces of paper and said, draw me some pictures. So I drew all the pictures of Murray Island, because influenced by my father, the shape of Murray Island and the stories he told us, I put into my books. And then she said, okay, at the end of it, she said, all right, now tell me the stories. So then she wrote down what the stories were about on each page, and then when it came time for reading, that was my reading book. So then it encouraged me to read. Because apart from that, I don't think I would like to have read, because the books I just couldn't, you know, understand. And so with that, that's where my father started the school, because he thought instead of children losing the essence of being who they are and being true to themselves through a mainstream system, let's develop a school that encourages them to be themselves. Encourage them, if they don't want to read at that time, that's okay, they can go and sit on the beanbag and do something else while everyone else is reading. Because it was at the classroom that had many seats around the outside that would encourage people to either sit at the desk or sit on the beanbag. We weren't stipulated just to be sitting at desks. Because it was a thing of, you feel comfortable sitting in that beanbag but still listening and doing things, go and do it. My mother was the crafts teacher. She was the auntie who made all the lunches for all the kids who didn't bring sandwiches. She was also the one to come wipe your nose, it was snotty. And it was one of the things that now, because my mother's now 72, she's losing her sight. I took her out for New Year's, and all the boys in the room that happened to be at karaoke, she wanted karaoke, all the boys that happened to be at karaoke that night were all ex-students of Black Community School. So they all lined up and they all came over to give my mother a Happy New Year's kiss, and they also whispered in her ears, "Thank you very much for those yummy Vegemite sandwiches you used to make us." And she cried for the whole night. But it was good because it was that thing of just them showing their appreciation for what she did for us while we were at school. And because, you know, Dad was the bus driver, the gardener, the groundsman, the principal, the one who wrote all the submissions for everything else, and then Dad when he got home. So it was like, we can't muck up at school, so we've got to make sure we're real good. But one of the things was when my father did the school, only 3 teachers ever stuck by him for that whole time. And the school ran for 15 years. And then it only closed because the government decided to take the money away, because in the end, they thought he was teaching black power. Yeah, it was power to us because we're culturally strong. We're culturally strong people because of that. It's really interesting because I'm going to do a stat about the kids that went there to find out what they've done and what they've gone on to continue. Because a lot of us have gone on to still hold strong our cultural values. We teach it or we perform it. We do something that is really, really strong within our own communities that we live. So yeah.
You said Ming before?
It's Murray's and ink, yes.
Murray's and ink. You want to explain what a Murray is?
Well, Murrays, to us in Queensland, that's the terminology for blackfellas. For Indigenous Queenslanders. So we call ourselves Murrays because where Queensland is, yeah, Indigenous peoples, we just say, if I was to meet someone from New South Wales, they call themselves a Koori. Koori is Indigenous people of that area, whereas we're Murrays. We come from the north. And like if you go to WA, they call themselves Noongas. So each area has a particular name for the Indigenous people of the area. Like then someone would say to me, okay, who are you? And I say, well, my name's Gail Mabo. I'm from the Peerdrum clan and I'm from Murray Island. But in schools when I go, I say, I'm a Peerdrum woman, I am from Mayor. Because it brings back the language of my island. Murray Island is the English name, Mayor is our language name. So yes. So we have to start instilling language in children. So I introduced the language name for my island. They can look at it on the map, has an English name, but then I make them put in brackets what the language name is. Yeah.
It's important to know in North Queensland there's 3 types of black people.
Yes.
And I think Gail has the heritage of the
Of 3. So in Queensland, we have Torres Strait Islanders, we have Aboriginal people, and we also have South Sea Island people, which are people who were brought to Australia from Vanuatu, who came as slaves to work the sugarcane fields. And so with that, my mother, her heritage is South Sea Island Aboriginal. And so therefore, and my father being Torres Strait, that's my makeup. So I still have to learn about these 2. I know really strong my Torres Strait background, but I'm now learning about my mother's side because I have to embrace the 3.
Queensland kept hidden, Australia kept hidden that we had a slave trade. The slave trade was managed by predominantly Scottish people.
Mm-hmm.
And Townsville, where our main campus is named after a very senior slaver by the name of Robert Towns. It was a slave import. And that bit of history was never taught to me when I went to school. And not taught to many people at all.
And many of my aunties, who are my mother's cousins but older cousins, they talk about the tunnels that were built because they used to have where the port is, there used to be a port that was a little bit further away. They built tunnels to bring the slaves into town because you couldn't bring them on top because you didn't want people to know that you had slaves. So they'd put them through a tunnel. They'd have a holding place, which is now the old customs house. Downstairs at the old customs house has a chamber where you still see the indentations of where the chains were that they kept them. And then they would smuggle them out through another tunnel to then put them onto back of wagons then to take them to the farms that they needed to work at.
And I suppose the other thing to talk about, the Torres Strait. The Torres Strait Islanders weren't the first there, the Koorak people were.
Yep.
And so an Aboriginal group were the first inhabitants of the Torres Strait. And Torres Strait Islanders now honour that, don't they?
We do. We honour the fact that because the Torres Strait is part of the land bridge from Papua New Guinea to Australia, and then as the continent separated, the islands were formed, and then therefore Australia became where it is now, and Papua New Guinea the same. But during that time, the land bridge was the home of the Koorak nation, who actually they travel that backwards and forwards. And then when it divided, then we as Melanesians came in on our boats, because I'm the 18th generation of my family who live on Murray Island. So that goes back a fair way.
The Koorak people now live on Horn Island predominantly?
Yes, Horn Island and Bamaga, which is on the mainland of Australia.
That's where the airport is. If you go to the Torres Strait, you land at Horn Island.
Yep.
Any other?
Yes, I'm just wondering, your dad fought for the land,
Yes.
the peoples, and I'm just wondering, going forward, is there any more fights that your people...
in the Torres Straits now, they're fighting for their sea rights. They're wanting to govern the Torres Straits in the fact that we farm the ocean. We take things from the ocean that we need on each particular island. And the government's saying, no, we want commercial fishermen to go through. But if you let a lot of fishermen come through, that depletes what we have. So they want to ensure that over time, there is still plentiful for us. So they're trying to zone the area and giving us particular distances off each island that are inaccessible to mainland fishermen. Because if you give them an inch, they'll take many miles. So we don't want that to happen. So yeah, so that's the next battle that's happening. And then the other one that I was told about last week was, my dad had this vision in 1976 when we first came back from the Torres Straits, that the Torres Straits should be autonomous to Australia. It's only now they're reviving that. And I thought, in 1976, you guys thought my father was crazy for even having that notion. And now you're saying it's your idea? Okay, I'll let them think about that for a little bit longer. But to be autonomous, they say that there's enough industry in the Torres Straits now that will help govern them to become self-sufficient and rule themselves. Because for a long time we've been under the Queensland government umbrella. Yeah.
All right, well, I thank Gail very, very much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank
I hope
you.
Gail will come again.